Mr. Passant, good afternoon. You are the Executive Director of Eurosif. Eurosif is the leading European Sustainable Investment Membership Association, and it has a series of very important goals. Can you tell us what your main objectives are at the European level in terms of lobbying, in terms of proactive role?
Sure. So, as you know, we relocated a year and a half ago from Paris to Brussels, actually just to be, of course, closer to where the action is taking place in terms of European policy, and drawing upon our constituents, which really are representatives of the sustainable investment industry and its value chain. Our policy topics aligns well with that. So I would classify policy topics around 4 or 5 themes. One of the big themes is, of course, transparency. And that means transparency from a issuer perspective, so from a company perspective, and we're talking here about really sustainability reporting, non-financial information provided by corporates. And the mirror of that would be transparency from investors and asset managers, basically what we call disclosure of ESG, meaning to what extent they disclose whether or not they make reference in their investment policies to ESG factors. You know, ESG standing for environmental, social, and governance factors. So that's a transparency theme, I would call it that way. Another emerging theme is corporate governance and stewardship, basically the responsibility of investors. On the corporate governance side, we're active and we're closely talking to the Commission, as you know, who has issued last December an action plan on this. So we're pushing for the common themes of that are very dear to the SRI industry, such as separation of power, transparency, disclosure of remuneration policies, for instance, in the classical way. And also we are tackling the topic of stewardship to see to what extent, for instance, what has been done in the UK could be relevant and applicable more broadly to other European jurisdictions. And the final topic, I think, that is also an emerging topic is really the long-term investment topic. That's again a new initiative by the Commission, which, as you know, will issue any day now a green paper on long-term investments. And we believe that SRI aligns really well with consideration alongside long-term investments, creation of long-term value, and transition to a more sustainable economy. So we're working on those 3 things mainly.
Okay, thanks. You were telling us something about transparency. One of your most recent initiatives is the Transparency Code. Can you tell us something more about the Transparency Code?
Sure, thank you for asking. If I can just correct you, I think it's not actually a very recent initiative. The first Transparency Code roots back to 2004, but it has evolved, of course, over time. So what we did last February was launching the version 3 of that code, which, as you understand, a code has to reflect current developments in the industry. So a couple of novelties that the code brings. First, more readability for readers, so less questions, less sections, less duplication of questions maybe, more precise questions as well, which some kind of bring the code to a more standardization. There's also a couple of new questions, for example, a question around PRI, the Principle for Responsible Investments, questions around new instruments that could be used, or techniques that could be used, such as derivative products or securities lending. So we see this really as an evolution of a code, a positive one. Feedback from the market is pretty good so far. And we believe that for retail investors, which is the primary audience of the code, as well as, let's face it, for institutional investors and other stakeholders, this will provide a very interesting tool to compare and contrast the different SRI offerings. The other aspects of this exercise is also to provide more self-regulation within the industry. You know, transparency is also good for everybody.
Last question for you. What about the so-called Global Alliance? What is this very important initiative at a global?
Thanks. So the GSI, the Global Sustainable Investment Alliance, is actually the result of a range of discussions that have been happening in the background for many years, actually, between the most important SIFs in terms of size around the world. It is basically the alliance of 5 or 6 SIFs, of which 3 European Sustainable Investment Forums, Eurosif, but also the Dutch SIF and the British SIFs. And the whole idea behind the GSIA is to formalize a little bit the relationship, but keep a lot of flexibility in the way we work together and also individually, with a main goal of deepening the visibility and the impact of each of the SIF members, and more broadly speaking, of course, of increasing the recognition of SRI globally on a global basis. And that will go through work on through specific projects or initiatives. For instance, research. We published last February the first global sustainable investment landscape, which is a premiere. We're also thinking maybe potentially in the future around other ad hoc projects around policy, but nothing is of course funded at this stage.